All right. So I most probably will also do my supposed class that I was on the schedule for next month. If tonight there's a lot of broad framework ideas going to be shared, maybe and hopefully some time for other people, because I would really like to hear your input and feedback. I know Gideon's got some connections. I don't know if I correct Gideon via Shoshana in your family with people with strong prophecy grounding. So there's a couple of ideas here that I wish I could tell you that I could get some other people that can confirm what I'm going to propose to you, but they aren't. Usually when I've got some idea about a doctrine or something, Bible study like the Samaritan woman, for example, and I come to a slightly different conclusion in some cases, there's usually enough other people on the internet that kind of also saw something like that. But in this case, as you'll see later tonight, I found nothing. So all of you brethren, please feel free to take notes. I can share this slideshow with you, and let's see where we go. And if we need or want to, just take this further, or if you might want to have a look at the Telegram channel that I've started, and I will be adding things to. So why the idea of prophecy revisited? Basically, as you can see on that slide there, if you take the it out of revisited, and the it gets less focus, in this case being information technology. The idea is that if we give it less importance and be a bit more focused as to what we should look for, then we might get to a case where we look at prophecy and use the technology to our advantage to sometimes maybe have to revise a little bit of what we have always believed or some framework we have. So I have revised my some of my understanding on prophecy, as I'll show you tonight, and hopefully I can make it clear enough so you can see why. Right, so I did say, with all the geopolitics going on, so let's just quickly have a look at that. What is geopolitics? We all know, it's the study of the relationship among politics and geography, demography, economics, especially with respect to the foreign policy of a nation. And the bottom there, again, a study of the influence of such factors, geography, economics, demography, and on the politics and especially the foreign policy of a state. So I don't know about you, but with being a keen, interested student of prophecy and just my kind of personality, I like to sort of try and figure out at least what is coming in the future. Not that I need to know all the detail, but I do also believe that God has given us prophecy for various, a lot of reasons where we're going to need to be strong in our faith in the future. So if you then look at all the things going on in the world, it is a bit of a challenge for us because, with the internet, YouTube and whatever, you can follow so many things and get so many people's perspective on what is going on. We do need to know, though, that our understanding of prophecy will, whatever approach we come with, is going to determine the focus that we place on whatever geopolitics we look at. We will favor certain countries above others. So, for example, then, if you're non-religious and you don't believe in prophecy, there's no prophecy in your mind, or you don't believe in it, most likely your focus on the geopolitical content on the internet and so will be kind of driven by what is the newest things going on in the world and all the drama. So currently, it was most surely will be Israel and the USA, Russia with the war in Ukraine, and Israel, America, and their connection, and everything that's happening in Gaza at the moment. Other countries that will be on your radar is China and Iran, and Saudi Arabia most probably will also catch your attention at the moment. So I want to show you though that, and I think we'll all agree with this. I presume everyone can hear me? I heard a noise there, but anyway.
Can hear you.
All right. So if you let's say you're religious and you have a prophecy framework of whatever kind, that will also kind of have an influence as to where your focus is going to go, or whether you might have some bias as to what you want to look at, or what you feel is right and you enjoy seeing, but the other things you might not. So, for example, if we look at our brotherhood at the moment, the Christadelphian majority, and the way we understand prophecy at the moment, we will for certain have the focus on Israel, what is going on there, and I've put in brackets America because we all know the news at the moment. Israel's got all the backing from America. They've been provided with the weapons to wage the war in Gaza. And definitely there will be a great focus on Russia and the war with Ukraine because of the emphasis we have on in Ezekiel 38 and the way we interpret that chapter. So in Ezekiel 38 there are nations mentioned, and the mainstream Christadelphian majority interpretation of prophecy is that Russia, Gog is Russia, or Rosh in that verse. And then we've got these other nations mentioned there that obviously then will really catch our interest if there's any geopolitical commentaries or studies or videos made on these countries. So there's this focus on the Middle East nations in relation to how the peace in Ezekiel 38 will be established so that Russia can come down. And I just need you to understand that focus, and maybe later you'll see why this could be problematic, or maybe our focus should be a little more in the Middle East for a few different reasons. But this is just to give you an idea that it is important that we understand that we got to get our frameworks right, and that will drive the focus to where we're really going to look at the geopolitics of certain countries, as we want them to see how they are moving closer to what the Bible is actually teaching is going to happen in the end times. So here are some challenges with the geopolitics that we can get all in. It's quite hard to establish the truth in sometimes. You'll get two views. At the moment, there are people that saying, economy of China is going down the drain. Other people say economy of China is going great and it will be much better in the future. So you have a bias sometimes of people saying different things. Sometimes you just have outright fake, false news. I think yesterday there was some false news about Putin being ousted out of his power seat there, and which is obviously false news. But then also you get your mainstream media narratives where those people are sometimes biased, but sometimes just outright they want to just give information to pitch paint a certain kind of picture, and that they want to uphold, but it's not necessarily the truth of the reality on the ground. So if we're going to use geopolitics as a measure of seeing prophecy unfold, we want to use it to do that, but we have to be solid in a correct interpretation of Bible prophecy. Then we're in a much better position to do so, and we will avoid some pitfalls. It will help us to keep the focus on the right players, nations, so to speak, and not to get distracted by so much that is interesting but also complex, because you can really get so fixated with every little thing that's happening in every country, that you will be forever busy looking at things that are not going to help your faith and your understanding of prophecy in the Bible. So I'm just going to run through a couple of perspectives in the geopolitical arena, and I would like you to think of them, and maybe we might ask someone just to, you can just unmute yourself and answer. There's a lot of people of the opinion that America will lose its global power status in the near future. China is to emerge as a global power. Russia will remain a strong power, economically actually strengthened by the sanctions that America and the world is placing on it. Very interesting facts to prove that the economy of Russia is now much stronger than before the Ukrainian war, and specifically because the sanctions were placed on it. We have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa starting a coalition called BRICS, and they are wanting to put in place measures that is calling for the de-dollarization of the world, where countries will reduce reliance on the United States and the US dollar as a reserve currency and a medium of exchange as a unit of account. So that will end the dollar dominance, and that will have severe repercussions for America. The events in Gaza will leave Israel in a very despised as a nation in the eyes of many world countries. So I don't know of any of the brothers actually, have an interest in these things. Do you know anything about these kind of ideas and geopolitical views that are out in the world? Maybe just a quick round. Everybody can maybe give me just an input. I know I'm fully aware we've got two American brothers on the talk. So please, I'm just saying what other people are saying. I am very always had a soft spot for America. So if anything is gonna go a bit difficult there, or on the downward trend, I'll be as sad about it as a lot of other people. Any comments so far, just from what I've said? Anyone seen these things, are aware of them? This idea that we might be living in a total different kind of world order economically in the future sometime, should Jesus not return?
So, I guess as I see all of this, so do I think about these things? Yes, I live in America. This is stuff that's going on. Do I stay awake at night? No, but obviously I think about them. What I would be curious to hear is this is a perspective, and there's lots of perspectives out there on the internet, as I'm sure you know, and so you can find lots of different things
Yeah.
out there. I'd be curious to know what your reasons are, as opposed to just sort of like, here it is. And so that's the sort of thing I think is most interesting, is in terms of what does our additional perspective as
Yeah.
scholars of the Bible bring to us. Otherwise, we're just another voice in a lot of voices out there making predictions.
Yeah. James, super comment that you made there. Very good, because that's the whole idea why I'm starting with this, but it will, I think, will answer your question a bit more fully now, because what we're gonna do is I just want to, like James said, you look at all these things and you wonder, okay, um, there's so much and so many perspectives and things going on. We want to, and if you look at these things and you get fixated with them, you'll either, like you say, you'll battle to sleep at night, or you'll I believe you'll get your focus drawn away from the faith and where the prophecies are. So what we want to do is, when we get our prophecy framework correct, then we will say, okay, of all of this, maybe the focus should be, whatever is happening to Russia. That will it's I'm a bit interested to see there, because that could lead, um most likely is gonna what is gonna lead to what the prophets say we are gonna end up before Jesus returns. For example, it will be foolish to get overly um, interested and fixated about South Africa and the BRICS, setup, because obviously in the prophecies, South Africa doesn't feature. Just that kind of idea. All right, so maybe this is what we're striving for. Then we first want some sound biblical interpretation. Let the Bible interpret itself. Look at every detail. Sometimes we leave some details to speculation, and if we can get as much of the detail in the Bible correctly interpreted, that would be great. And then we want to be objective, avoid mainstream narratives, keep an eye on the real geopolitical developments of the key players in Bible prophecy. So for me, I'm always saying, well, there's four sides to a story. There are two sides, like for instance, at the moment, there's Israel, and on the other side there's Hamas and Gaza and the Palestinians. Both will be very biased in the way they project things. Then you get the reality, what is actually going on there in Israel and in Gaza itself, what is really happening there. And then, more important, we've got God's side. How is all of this heading up to the day of Christ's return? And we really need to focus on those last two elements there. So we would like to have some biblical objectivity. For example, just two examples. In Gaza at the moment, who's right? Or is it Israel or Hamas? Who's right? Is it Israel or the Palestinians? Could both of them be wrong in what they're doing at the moment, or what they have done, or how things are going? Should there be a two-state solution? Can there ever be one? Do we know enough about what's going on there to even have some kind of idea on answers on those questions? The war in Gaza is 6 months ongoing now, and obviously a lot of people saying it's genocide. Is it genocide? Is Israel committing genocide? Yes or no? And here's the biggest threat I feel for us as brothers and sisters is with prophecy, and maybe why people get discouraged is the world forces people into groups to pick a side, and for example, they'll say, well, are you on, do you stand for Israel or for the Palestinians? And I often think of Jesus. They would ask him a question like that, and he would say something like neither. Or who's right or wrong, Israel or the Palestinians? He might say both, and not pick sides. So we should be careful not to pick sides. Uh, Observe things in terms of how they are fitting into prophecy, and how is it fitting into moving the right players closer to the end game, if you want to make that chess analogy. Same, I'm not going to go through this, but I just want to mention, for example, that people, if we look at the current situation with Gaza, people often just are too general about things. So, if you speak about Palestinians and you make a assessment on that, they will say, "Oh, you are pro Hamas," and people, they need to be a bit more, I think, researchful in when they look at these things. So, some people just say all the Palestinians are complicit in what's happening there, and some might be, some most definitely are, but um, do every single Palestinian share this ideology of wanting the Jews exterminated? We know the Palestinians turned down opportunity to have their own state in the past. Was it the people or the rulers, all of them? But what has happened since then? Has Israel been righteous in God's eyes in the way they um, taking possession of the land? It is interesting that we all know from the Bible, Israel is God's chosen people. God promised them the land, but maybe we need to consider that they were not supposed to take the land and the way they have and the way they're busy taking it now. And to me, there's a classic case of Jesus that never took, God promised him the world. And it said in Psalm 2, ask of me and I will give it to you. So he will return and then the whole world will be his, but under God's conditions. And I believe Israel has definitely not followed that example that God has given us. Right. What type of nation does prophecy tell us should we expect Israel to be shortly before Jesus' return? Now, I propose to you all, and I'd be slightly surprised if you don't agree, that it's a very unrighteous, ungodly nation, because we have the prophecy of the dry bones, and Jesus has to fill those Israel with the Spirit so that it can become a godly nation that worships God again in the right way. So we should not be surprised if we find Israel doing things that are not righteous today. We know that we will find Israel a nation hated by the nations round about them. Um, and I think if you look at what's happened to the Hamas leadership and the Palestinians, um, logic should tell us that they're not ever going to forget the past and this past 6 months and what's possibly coming now with a new onslaught in the next section of Gaza. Um, so I think it's a bit naive to think that there'll come a time when these people will just resolve all these issues. They're going to be there till Jesus returns. Okay, I'm not going to go through Russia and the war, but it's a similar thing. We have to ask questions and try and get to the real idea. What I want to now go to is more scriptural and show you why I've put that in red. There are so many differences of opinions who is going to win this war. And when this war started 2 years ago, a lot of Christadelphians, there was a flurry of videos coming out on a Christadelphian YouTube channel about that we might be starting, at the starting process of Jesus returning very soon, or Russia is going to win the war in Ukraine and then move on and come down, according to Ezekiel 38, to invade Israel. And one of the narratives there is that Putin is obsessed to build back the Russian Empire, which he is, but is he obsessed of getting a world empire that goes far beyond that into Israel? That is another question. Maybe we should ask ourselves, if it takes Russia 3 years or more to conquer Ukraine, how long will it take to invade Israel after a draining Ukrainian war? So maybe then in that case, if that's the way we want to see things play out, it might still be a long time before Jesus returns. It's interesting to know that Russia's got other ideas in the world on its invasion map that is more in sync with its aspirations and needs. Norway, very interesting geopolitical things going on there, where Russia wants to invade Norway. And now I want to go to the Bible and say, is Russia even involved in Ezekiel 38? Now, you might think that is the most outrageous statement ever made. So let me explain. We're going to revisit prophecy and see if there might be a little need that we need to focus a bit more on other things in terms of this landscape that's going to exist before Jesus returns, especially in terms of the nations involved and the time frame. So I'm first going to just show you some common ground, the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel, just one slide. Don't worry, we're not going into depth. Then we're going to look at Zechariah 14, because those two things, I think everyone, usually even most Christians, have that in common. And once we have those beacons sort of set down, we can then go and look at the other three items. The one is Armageddon, and then Ezekiel 38, and then I will put down a timeline that would more give an indication as to what it looks like as most of Christians believe at the moment, and maybe why we should revise it perhaps. And you can look at these things and obviously study for yourself. Right, so the 70-week prophecy of Daniel, I'm assuming we're all pretty familiar with this, but you know, in a most basic diagram, what we have here is Daniel was told that God has got a specific time that's going to play out, and at the end of that time, everything is wrapped up. Israel will be a holy nation again. All sins will be forgiven, and uh, we all agree with that. So the 69 weeks has already passed, and you can actually with dates really pinpoint and prove that very easily. But that ended when you know, Israel went back to the land, and then there's this period in between that we are living in now, and the last week of the 70-week prophecy has not been fulfilled, that I'm coloring in here in yellow. And that week is what we are waiting for. That must still happen. And at the end of that week, Jesus returns, and there's the 1,000-year kingdom. This period in Daniel, this last week, the 70th week, is discussed in Daniel 9 verse 27, and it's cut in half, and it's spoken of, and most people agree about this, that the last half of that week, or 7 years, 3.5 years, is the Great Tribulation, or the time of Jacob's trouble. So it's a time when the Jews definitely, whether it's going to be us as well is the question. They are going to go through very, very difficult times. And Jesus speaks about this in Matthew 24:5, immediately after those days, the time of the Great Tribulation, he will return. So we got to, whatever we look at prophecy, we want to make sure that we understand this. And now, you know, where are we going to be gathered, at what time before Jesus returns, and what are the things, a bit more detail, that happens in this last week. So two important points when we look at this prophecy of Daniel. Whatever conclusions we come to, we have to sort of try and explain from scriptures when will the saints be gathered. But I want to pose one question that becomes very important now. We know from Ezekiel 38 that the idea there is that when Israel dwells safely, Gog will come down and at that end time. And so that is when the enemies will come down and that group confederation of nations. But we know from the Daniel's 70-week prophecy that at the end, when Jesus does come and save them, Israel is not at all in a place of dwelling safely. They are in great trouble, about to be, exterminated, according to Zechariah 14. So we will go there, and at least we can just put some pegs in the sand as to some definite scenarios that will be at play just before Jesus returns. So let's look at Zechariah 14. And we know when Jesus comes back in Zechariah 14, the nations are around about Jerusalem, and they are under severe tribulation, the Jews, and that causes Jesus to come back. And we find this in the previous chapter, Zechariah 13, verse 7. The prophecy says, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man that is my fellow, saith Yahweh of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn my hand upon the little ones. It shall come to pass that all in the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left in there. And I will bring the third part through fire, and will refine them as silver is refined. So notice, I want you to notice that we're going to have the same pattern as in AD 70 when Jerusalem was taken. First, the land of Israel gets obviously invaded by the enemies at that time, and they just get closer and closer to Jerusalem and encircle it, and then in AD 70 razed it to the ground. And here we have a similar thing. So it is very much in line with this idea of the last week of the 70-week prophecy, where Israel is going to be under much pressure and tribulation. 2/3 of the land die. And en route to Jerusalem, the enemies have invaded the land and conquered it. So just like 70 AD, Jerusalem is the last bastion to be conquered. And that is now where Zechariah 14 comes into play. So notice now, Zechariah 14, we all know this is an Armageddon, last great battle prophecy. In Zechariah 14, I'm going to go through that quite quickly. Notice in the 21 verses in these chapters, Jerusalem is mentioned often, 10 times, right? I have highlighted in green all the verses where Jerusalem is mentioned. I've just shortened the verses, giving you the main points. There'll be nations round about Jerusalem, and then the cities taken. And notice what happens. This is definitely people not dwelling in safety. They are under immense pressure. Houses destroyed, women's ravished. And Jesus said this time that the Jews are going to go through is like nothing they've ever seen before. Then it says Yahweh fights against those nations. And it says in that verse, as when he fought in the day of battle, referring to something in the Old Testament. And I would suggest to you that Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20 went and an amazing pattern for showing you a type. What happened there is almost exactly going to happen when Jesus returns. You will, if you put the two side by side, you will be amazed to see the two, how similar these two events were. So we know from verse 4, Jesus returns to the Mount of Olives before Jerusalem. and Jews must flee to the mountains. There's no idea of them dwelling safely. It's wartime and people are under pressure. Jesus returns with the saints. There's some other details here, but I want you to notice verse 9 and 10. Jesus will rule in a renewed Jerusalem. The geographics will change. We all know that. But then in verse 11, there will be no more utter destruction. Notice the severity of the pressure there. Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. So the result of Zechariah 14, the result of Jesus coming back is that Jerusalem is safely inhabited. The people that live there is now living there in safety. How is the enemy going to be destroyed? Their flesh will be consumed away. The nations around is terrified. They fight each other. Judah fights at Jerusalem. Very important little detail there. And they go, and there's wealth of the nations, of the heathen round about, of these countries round about that are neighbors to Israel. We know those countries, who they are at the moment. And what is happening in the world today is moving the world to this point where these nations round about are hating Israel so much that they want to destroy them. And that is the closest we've ever come to this is right now in our world. So I'm not saying this is happening now, but it shows you it can happen at any time. So after Jesus beats these destroys these enemies of Israel, the nations round about, then all nations will be subdued and they must come to Jerusalem to worship. So you get very much this idea that Jerusalem and Israel is then a place of safety. People are invited to come and they are required to come to Jerusalem to come and worship there. Interesting enough, Egypt is mentioned, which is to the south, and the Canaanites, which is to the north, is mentioned. They will live in peace with those people. Seems to be that it says there will be sacrifices in the Lord's house in Jerusalem. Is there another temple? Questions we have to answer. But the main thing about Zechariah 14 that I want to focus on, and it is very important, that it is Jesus when he returns that brings about the safety that Israel is going to be dwelling in. And nothing before that is ever going to get Israel into such a state. So, Zechariah 14 is Armageddon. Now, interesting enough, many people say World War III might happen. It might happen, but World War III is not Armageddon. That will be when nations fight against nations. If people are worried now that all the nations are going to start fighting each other because of the way the world is at the moment. But Armageddon is not a World War III. It is when the nations are against Jesus, and he returns to rescue Israel. And we have this name only once in the Bible, and it's the theme of the final climatic battle between Jesus and the nations round about. So there's these themes there: the sickle, the harvest, all nations, and the valley of judgment. So I just want to show that Armageddon is not at the mountain of Megiddo. A lot of people say that's where the final battle is going to be. Now, again, we really have to, if we look at in the Bible, we'll see that there's no real mountain at Megiddo. But much more important, if you look at the word Armageddon, it comes from 3 words. I don't know why I've lost the screen. Where on earth am I go? Okay, there we go. So we've got Armageddon coming from three words, Arma, Gay, and Don. And if you look at the meaning of all of that, the last one, Don, is interesting because it has a connection with Jehoshaphat. And it means Yahweh judges. So when you combine all these elements, it really means it's a place where a valley where there's a heap of sheep set there for judgment. Now, where is this valley? Well, we should understand that we already know Zechariah told us that Armageddon, that last battle, is when all the nations are around Jerusalem. And if you look at this carefully, the prophecies in Micah, Zechariah, Joel, all talk about the gathering of nations against Jerusalem. And in Joel 3, which is definitely an Armageddon, the last days when Jesus comes, prophecy, it all talks about this idea of a valley of Jehoshaphat. It's a valley of decision, but it's when all the nations are gathered against Jerusalem. So the action takes place outside the city of Jerusalem, not 60 miles north near Megiddo. What I'm going to show you here is what we really want to focus on is that Armageddon is when the nations come against Jerusalem in the valley of Jehoshaphat next to Jerusalem. So by the time the nations are besieging Jerusalem, the rest of the land, the West Bank, the rest of the land will have been taken by the enemy. The last bastion they want to take is Jerusalem. And that is what Zechariah 12 and other references in the Bible indicate to us, that Israel's going through this terrible time where their land has been taken back, and now they want to just do like they did in AD 70, destroy the capital city of them. Let me do that. So Armageddon prophecies that point to the same event is Joel, Psalm 83, Micah 4, Zechariah 12, and 14. Talk about this. So I want to suggest to you that Ezekiel 38 does not speak of the same event. Let's look at Ezekiel 38 now and see what that prophecy tells us. Right, here's Ezekiel 38, verses 1 to 7, and some of the verses. The nations mentioned in Ezekiel 38 is not around Jerusalem. And Israel is dwelling safely. We have this kind of idea. They are the nations. And if you interpret the names of those nations biblically, Gog, Tubal, and Tubal, and Meshach, they all point to Turkey. But even if you make it Russia, these nations are not round about Israel. And the word Jerusalem is never mentioned in Ezekiel 38. We find that God says that Gog comes against my land, and Gog is defeated in a much different way than it is in Zechariah 14. They fall on all the mountains of Israel. The fighting in Israel with Gog is even before Gog gets near Jerusalem, and on the mountains they are killed. And there is no war and mention of Judah that is doing some of the fighting. Jerusalem is never mentioned. And they are destroyed by natural forces, not by Jesus and Judah going and the saints going out and fighting as in the day of battle. So what we are trying to get to is, if you let the Bible interpret itself only, you go, Gog points to Turkey. If you look at the other way, geographical and languages and how people migrated, then that is how we get to the idea that Go is Rosh or Russia. Now, this is very debatable. It will be debated till Jesus comes back. Um, and it's by no means as conclusive as it seems that Rush is Russia. So I just want you to all keep that in mind and go and do your own research on this matter and see what you find. But it's really on this idea of the dwelling safely that I believe we um, have the most speculation as to what that means. People say Israel will feel safe. They perceive themselves to be safe because of their defense systems. And Israel signs, or they might sign a ceasefire deal, and then they're dwelling safely, or they will defeat the current enemies around about them now. And that is what most people at the moment are thinking. Christadelphus are thinking that if they can uh, destroy Hamas and Hezbollah and even Egypt and everybody is subdued to them, and they got their army strong enough and their defense systems, and they can defeat those people, they themselves, then there will be a peace situation. But we got to ask ourselves, if Israel could not defeat Hamas with all the help from the USA in 6 months, and who knows how long this is still going to drag on, do they really have the capacity to beat all the other enemies round about at the moment? But this idea of Israel dwelling safely is the most neglected aspect in terms of being biblically defined. So if we look at the clues in Ezekiel 38, we see there it talks about Go coming down and to a land that was bought, Israel now, back from the sword. That means they were saved in war. They are at rest. There's 17 Old Testament cross references that will tell us exactly what it means for Israel to be dwelling safely and to be at rest. They are in unwalled villages. Notice villages are not in Jerusalem. It's when Gog comes down, whoever Gog is, they will find people living in the villages. But before Christ returned, we see from Zechariah, the land has been taken and he saves them. So where do these people come now from that are now living in villages and in safety? They don't even have bars or gates. They don't need any defenses. Ezekiel 34 to 37 has this theme of Israel. Often in those chapters, it's prophesied that they will be in terrible times, but then eventually they'll be like sheep sleeping in the wilderness without shelter because there are no beasts around. Beasts are symbolic of nations and your enemies. So what I'm trying to show now from scripture, I'm not going to read these, but I want you to, if you do want to at some stage look at this again, have a look at Jehoshaphat when he went out to battle. What was and he had victory over all the enemies. It says they returned every man of Judah and Jerusalem, and Jehoshaphat in the forefront of them to go again to Jerusalem with joy, for the Lord had made them to rejoice over their enemies. Verse 29, the fear of God was in all the kingdoms of those countries when they had heard that the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel. So the realm of Jehoshaphat was quiet, for God gave him rest round about. The Bible definition of dwelling in safety and at rest is the reason for that is because all the enemies right about you, around about you, your neighboring countries, have been defeated and destroyed. There's no threat of any war from any nation round about. That happened to David. Solomon said, my father, he couldn't build a house for the Lord because of the wars that was about him from every side, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord God had given me rest on every side, so that there's neither adversity nor evil occurrent. David in Psalm 180, verse 10 says, all nations compass me about, but in the name of the Lord will I destroy them. They compass me about, yea, but in the name of the Lord I will destroy them. Yes, something fascinating. Ezekiel 38. If we look at these countries, what happened to all these nations here? Where have they disappeared to? Because they don't seem to be there when Go comes down. How come we don't have these nations there? How did that we know from today will never stop hating Israel? Well, like in David's time, he conquered all those nations. And look how interesting is that in a map to show the nations that King David conquered, they are that area that we are talking about here, the nations round about. Exactly the same map you're going to draw if you draw the countries of Psalm 83. So Jesus, the greater David, will come and destroy the current Middle East nations round about enemies, and that will bring the dwelling safely status to that Israel is in when these other nations will come for a second round. But the point is that happens, Ezekiel 38 happens after Zechariah 14, after Armageddon. I'm going to sum this up with a prophecy timeline and then I'm done. So what I want to submit you to is here's my revised timeline. And then point out to you why I think it's quite important. And I see we are just about done with the time. So currently, we believe that the Armageddon prophecy, most people interpret it as such that Ezekiel 38 is also an Armageddon prophecy. And Russia gathers all the nations to come invade Israel, and then Jesus returns. And therefore, prior to Jesus' return, the safety that Israel has is a speculative one, whether they're going to have it because there's a ceasefire or they subdue their enemies by their own strength. And therefore, the focus is on Russia and Israel. One of the key factors now of this prophecy is that for us, we are more kind of comfortable spectators because we will be taken to be gathered to Jesus somewhere, before Armageddon. And we are just kind of waiting for when we will be taken so that we can be with Jesus when he goes to conquer Russia, when they come down and encircle Israel. So notice now the revised version. When Jesus returns, Armageddon, we have Joel and Zechariah and Psalm 83, the nations round about. That victory at Armageddon will result in a scripturally defined safety and dwelling safely and Israel being at rest. And that is when Gog, which could be Turkey, gathers this outer ring of nations of Ezekiel 38 to battle. And so Ezekiel 38 happens in the beginning time of the 1,000-year kingdom. This, however, would mean that we will have to endure some degree of the time of tribulation, the rule of the Antichrist in that last 3.5 years of the 70th week, and that is a very uncomfortable prospect. So I can understand why a lot of people won't like this idea. It will, depending on what prophecy you believe in, it will change your prayers. I used to pray like this: May Jesus return today or tomorrow, looking forward, because I'm looking forward to the kingdom to be established. I'm still looking forward to the kingdom to be established, but I'm asking God rather now, please help me in my preparation to endure whatever tribulation might come before Jesus returns, that might be come across my path. So, brothers, I know that was a lot. I'm gonna leave it at this, but I just wanted to share this with you, and I'm happy if I'm gonna stop sharing. If anyone has, I know it was a lot, but if you have some input or ideas, we can chat about it.